Hello, everybody. My name is Krista Dickinson. I'm the president and CEO of Interactive Ontario. We are a trade association who are here to foster the growth of the interactive digital media sector for the province. I'd like to thank all of those present here today. Welcome. Also important to welcome those who are joining us on our live stream. So hopefully you can hear us and see us well. You're here for one of our iON series events, and the series is generously sponsored by the CMF. And for this particular event on The Customer is Always Right, which I find is a fabulous title, that event, we have a partner, the Bell Fund, who's generously sponsored us. So thank you to both the CMF and the Bell Fund. I'd like to introduce Natalie Zena Walschutz. She's the social media strategist and community manager at Stitch Media. Natalie is going to wow us today with a phenomenal presentation, which I'm really, really looking forward to. Natalie has cultivated fandoms. She builds new communities and she develops character voices, leads interactive fiction workshops, designs alternate reality games, constructs branching narratives, and most mornings opens Tumblr, even before she opens her eyes, I'm told. I'm like, I don't know how she does it. Her work often introduces people to the thing they end up loving the most in the world. So she's currently finishing up Hench, a novel dedicated to the plight of hench people, the downtrodden and often expendable employees of supervillains. If this is not a fabulous intro, I don't know what is. Over to Natalie. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that excellent introduction that makes me sound like I do a lot in the world that doesn't involve me dropping my phone on my face every morning, which, spoiler alert, is how you look at Tumblr, and also being covered in Cheeto dust at most times while I'm doing those activities. So thank you so much. So this talk is rather provocatively titled, "The Customer is Always Right." We're going to be talking about discoverability, we're going to be talking about retaining fans, and we're going to be talking about big data. But the refrain you're going to be hearing from me probably most often throughout this presentation is, we want to help introduce people to the thing that we love most, that they end up loving most in the world. That's a core of my bio for a reason, and I think it's the kernel that's really at the center of this presentation. This is under the auspices of Threads Audience Development, which is the sister company of Stitch that does this kind of big data and discoverability work that helps build and foster audiences and help them to thrive. And what is really, how do I put this? Art, to a certain degree, if you're going to share like a profound love of a thing, there's a point at which that process is collaborative. There is a point at which, in order for someone to invest wholeheartedly in the story, in whatever platform that you're creating, they have to buy in and feel like, not just feel like, but know truly that they are part of that process, to have given of themselves and contributed to that process some way, consciously or unconsciously, on the surface or somewhere, and deep in that process. And the way that we at Threads use these kind of techniques is to actually build collaborative audience models, which is probably the most exciting thing I've ever gotten to work on in my professional life. So if I'm a little bit fangirly about this, and this seems a little bit like a fanfic presentation, forgive me, but this is the dorkiest, most fun thing I've ever gotten to do, as a grown-up, so please bear with me as I geek out all over you right now. So we like to say that you don't have to be big to take advantage of big data. Every single one of us is contributing to and participating in a vast, ongoing big data experiment every single moment that we're online. Data is being gathered about us all of the time. What we do, what we like, what we watch, what we don't, what we read, what we finish reading. All of that data is available to us at all times. We're contributing to it as well as, and if you are aware of it, there are lots of really creative ways to access that data to help build and cultivate fandoms and fans, and to build audiences via it. Broadcasting is not necessarily the way of the future, by which I mean not that television and movies are no longer platforms that are going to be successful, but that the future instead is something that we like to refer to as narrowcasting, which is a one-to-one connection between the audience and the creator. So whereas broadcasting is, as the name indicates, you take what you have and you fling it out into the world. You use a broad brush to paint a potential audience. You fling it as far as you can and hope that something sticks with someone. Narrowcasting is that seeking out of a one-to-one intimate relationship and giving something directly to that person and having that person give you something directly back to you, in this case in the form of data. So we're trying to find exactly the correct person to be sending our message to deliver that story to, and the way that we do that is by using big data. So I'm going to walk you through a few different ways we use these strategies on one of our own platforms. Stitch Media created a series of adventure kits, which are part physical picture book, part interactive experience that involves games and, in some cases, scavenger hunts, interactive activities that children and parents play together. So the product, or the object, is you will get there's a physical component that is sent to you in the mail that involves the picture books, as well as other physical components that might be physical puzzles. They might be postcards. They might be supplies for doing an interactive craft together. And then when the parent gets it, there is a process of setting it up both physically and then online, and then parents and children play them together. At every point in the development of these adventure kits, we use these various tactics to connect with our audience from the moment that the product was conceived and now far into the delivery process. And I'll be touching on strategies that we used throughout the process as we were building this. So a very obvious initial sort of technique that we used was split testing, and we did this to name the product. Right from the very beginning, we used our potential audience to help us not only build what the product was going to be, but ultimately choose what it was called. So in naming our product, Together Tales began as a Kickstarter project, and it began under the auspices of the name Imaginary Friends. Then as we were developing it, we wanted to make sure that that prototype name was in fact the best name for the product moving forward. We did this by testing. We did this by creating identical ads that included that featured our director Evans, a photograph of our director Evans' children being adorable with various potential titles, and we put these in front of people and saw what they responded to. And it wasn't necessarily what we expected. It wasn't our first best guess. All of the material that we put out under the Together Tales brand ended up being so much more engaging and responded to noticeably positively. So we allowed that influence to ultimately define the name of the product that we had moving forward. We also have used these techniques to find and define our audience, and this is where things start getting really, really exciting for me. So classic demographic research and data tells us that moms make most of the choices when it comes to household spending around children. And a lot of, it's very easy to stop there. It's very easy to say, like, we have this demographic data. We're just going to market to moms. Dads, it costs so much more to market to dads. And to explain that a little bit, when it comes to discoverability, platforms charge you based on how good your content is. So if your content is good and engaging and people are responding to it, you are charged less money. If it's a harder sell, if people are not responding to your content, then it is more expensive. So a huge part of the targeting that we do and the fine-tuning that we do is finding the audience that will be most engaged with the content that's being put in front of them, so that advertising and that targeting costs as little as possible. So you can reach the most people who will be the most engaged with your stories, for the least financial investment, as well as just the people who are straight up going to end up loving it more than anybody else. So stopping at the demographic data would tell us, like, well, there's absolutely no point in marketing to dads whatsoever, because the moms are the ones who are going to make this decision. It seems to be straightforward, cheaper to do them. But when we drilled down into the data, we found a bunch of things that were actually quite interesting. It wasn't just moms. It was specifically moms that had interests like geocaching or role-playing games. We thought at one point that moms that would be interested in literature would perhaps be a really good market to appeal to, but in fact they were quite expensive. There were lots of surprises in this process. And when we actually looked at the data in terms of, which dads, despite it being more expensive, were responding to our ads, dads who liked LARPs thought our games were amazing. And in fact, when we tracked them and the other data that they gave us, as they continue to interact with the product, talk about it on social media after post buy, we actually found that those dads in that category tended to be some of the most passionate and engaged fans that we ended up getting. So simply stopping at like baseline demographic data is not enough. Digging into the behavior and the interests of the folks that you're appealing to is absolutely critical. And again, creating that narrow casting one-to-one relationship where you're not just finding sort of broad strokes who your audience are. You're finding out on a finely tuned granular level who are the people who are going to love the thing that you have to offer them. Since I've been with Stitch and with Threads, I had the experience of discovering that like board game dads love this. Like, it's everybody who plays Catan. They also want to bring Together Tales home to their kids, which is a really like wonderful and exciting discovery, and then informs what we do moving forward. Once we determined who our audience best was, like who those people were, drilled down into all of that data, we again let our audience in to help us define what our brand was going to look like. So that first impression, that like our brand identity, right down to the color palette that we used, was tested and shown to people, and we chose the thing that was responded to most positively. Again, from that audience that we identified of people who were going to be most interested in the products and in the stories that we were going to be delivering to them. This data is critical because it tells us what, if this is what the people who we know love our stories in the form that they are at now are already responding to, this gives us a lot of information about what a broader potential audience is also going to be into. And this is a never-ending project. We are consistently getting feedback and tweaking and tailoring and modifying Together Tales and all of our projects based upon the data and the feedback that we receive. So this particular graph measures how long it takes for players of Together Tales to move on to the next step in the module. So the way that it's sort of structured is the books are broken into 8 chapters. Each chapter is paired with a game or an interactive activity or another component to it. And what we noticed here was that whereas generally speaking, it was only taking a day or two for people to come back to it, book 5, we lost them for a week. They vanished. Something happened. So what we knew from that data was that something about that activity or that chapter in the book needs to be rewritten. There's a problem there. There's engagement friction. There's something preventing our audience from engaging with it at that moment. So having this data not only lets us create the look and feel, it not only allows us to target a very specific, very engaged potential audience, but it is involved with the creation and modification of the content that we end up producing. So this isn't just something that is is something that gets tacked on to the end. This is a process that we see integral to the entire creative process, from sort of conception and well past delivery, because as the word never ending might indicate, this is something that not only helps you modify one particular version, but then further iterations can do better and better and be more and more refined. Just another quick example. When we were working on our deck creation game, the Rival Books of Aster, we had a bazillion delightfully nerdy potential titles for this particular game series. We tested them all. We tested all of them, and there was unquestionably two that rose to the surface. These were the titles that people picked and responded positively to, and our posts using them got the most engagement, and Rival Books of Aster was ultimately what we settled on. Again, using that, we took that feedback to sort of inform the very basis of that particular project's identity. There's so many ways to gather this kind of data. For example, Wattpad has, everybody is sort of more familiar with, Facebook gathering absolutely every possible detail about you and how you live your life. You can digging into the depths of what you think Facebook knows about you is pretty fascinating. It will generate a list of interests for you. Facebook thinks I like goblins and Oreos, and it's not wrong necessarily. Just by watching the way that I move through the world, I can make pretty good guesses about the things that I'm going to be interested in. But there's lots of other platforms that are gathering fascinating data. Wattpad, for example, can tell how far your audience reads into a chapter. So not only do you get information oh, this person opened this chapter, they clicked through to this, they're on this page, we know how long they spent there and how long they scrolled through that chapter before they left. So we know which chapters are being read to completion in Wattpad. Super fascinating. So that means if there is a particular chapter that makes people leave, or where readership drops off, or if there are passages people are skipping, there are, if somebody is scrolling past a bit of description really, really fast, there are ways to get that data and seem maybe this is something that we should cut out. This is one of my additions to this particular presentation. This is the pit. It's a map in Halo, very, very dorky. But there's this is called a heat map, which indicates where in a video game players die, where the deaths occur. As you can see, there is a particular spot where everyone dies. If we have the data to be able to essentially read the heat map of what your story or what your product is, we can find those moments of engagement friction, or those moments where something isn't working, those moments where the player dies, or the moments where someone's engagement dies. If this is the moment where you lose somebody, that is the moment where something needs to be changed. This level should probably be redone. If you have a chapter where people are leaving, that is probably the chapter that needs to be rewritten. Essentially, what we're saying is there are kind of two ways to use big data and audience development to inform the work that you're making. You can either use it to, refine the idea that you already have. To make your story or make your product as it stands right now at this moment the best possible iteration of itself. Or you can harness that data, use what it tells you to instead to write the story that your audience wants, to fill the gap, the narrative gap, something that, and give people what they are hoping for, what they are looking for, and to ultimately end up with something that is so much better in terms of design, whether that be narratively, whether that be a UX issue, that you can deliver something to someone that is tailor-made for them based on all of this data, which is very exciting to me. So what does this mean? It means that it may sound like I'm shutting down creative potential, but actually I think that this opens it up to a whole bunch of really, really exciting possibilities. There's no such thing as a bad idea because you can test it. You can see if your story is good or not. You can see if your idea is valid. You can ask your potential audience. That is what Threads can deliver, is the possibility to know ahead of time whether this is something your audience is going to respond to. We can also do it quickly. There is, because we have the experience using this data, utilizing the platforms that collect and aggregate it, we're able to get through, to get these results pretty fast, and by being involved with the process right from the beginning, can give pretty immediate feedback. All those algorithms are very advanced thinking machines and can give you back data quicker than you might expect. Always be closing is a pretty classic adage in any kind of business or entrepreneurship, certainly. And in this particular case, when it comes to audience building, very often we tend to measure too soon, and we tend to sort of put our metric of success too early. We measure impressions or engagement when we should be measuring conversion, or at the end of the day, our great hope is fandom, right? What we're all hoping to do is not just get somebody who will buy a thing, though of course buying a thing is really wonderful. You want somebody who's going to buy 15 things plus the toy line and wear the t-shirt and tell all their friends about how wonderful it is and ultimately go to the convention. So always be closing isn't necessarily finishing. Always be closing in this particular context means we should always be thinking about the conversion, but also thinking beyond the conversion. So in addition to delivering those particularly useful metrics, Threads includes sort of post-launch and post-sale strategies that include things like coupon sharing and gathering reviews. So we are able to harvest those positive reviews, turn them back into messaging that can go out to new potential audiences, provide things that work really well are coupon codes that can then be that fans we have already can send to their friends and family for additional discounts. Once we know someone is engaged, we can give them additional discounts on future products, and the cycle continues and the cycle continues to feed itself. We want to reward that fandom at all times and use that enthusiasm that we have built to reach, again, a wider audience. You get what you measure. I think I said this. I may have skipped a little bit ahead in terms of my narrative here, but short-term wins like impressioning and engagement can be cool and interesting, but what you really want to do is measure your audience's entire path through their engagement with your narratives. You want to know, you want to be able to start with them, follow them through the whole engagement process, and know what they do ultimately at the end of that. The attention of your audience is precious. It is the most valuable commodity, someone's time. Because really that's what you're asking for in an audience, is their time. You're asking for ultimately you're asking for their affection, their fandom, their passion, their voice. But initially that first ask is, please watch this, please look at this, please read what I have for you. And appreciating that attention is a gift and intensely, intensely valuable, and is something that should be treated with respect and also served is a very important part of this process. The creative process is one that is based on editing. We don't super believe in final versions of things. We definitely believe in launch versions, but our creative process is one that is very processual and that can be intervened at any stage, and that we're constantly looking for feedback on. The position of serial writer, serial marketer, serial entrepreneur, we believe is changing into one of parallel writer, entrepreneur, and marketer, which again speaks to what I said at the beginning of this presentation, which is your relationship with your audience is collaborative and symbiotic. And inviting that audience in, taking their feedback and adjusting based on the data, based on that big data that you're getting, fundamentally changes the creative process, for sure. So here are all the answers, I suppose, when it comes to retaining fans using big data. You know, we have all of these techniques. We know that they work. They've applied them. What we need creators to bring to the table is what that valuable question is. We can get at all of this data for you. We can show you how people will respond to different iterations of your story. We can version things out with you. We can build a million different versions of a million different ads. But what it comes down to from a creative perspective is, where is your anchor? What is the one thing about your story, your narrative, your product, whatever you are building, that cannot be changed, that is absolutely essential to it? What is the thing that is most important to you about this story? Is it most important that it feature a young woman? Is it most important that your game is a puzzle platformer, but you don't really care like who the characters are or what the color palette is? Is it important that like this particular piece of music is at the core of this, but what the piece of art around that doesn't super matter to you? By knowing what the unchangeable center of your creative idea is, then you can know what the one thing you aren't willing to compromise on is. And from that center, from that certainty, from whatever your creative anchor is, you will not only be able to find your audience and to create the story or create the thing that is exactly the thing that they are looking for, but you will be able to stay true to your artistic vision in that process. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here with me through this. And I think we probably have time to take questions if anybody has any. Yes. Hi.
Is it? Yeah, there it is. Thanks for the presentation. A couple of questions. When you talk about being able to do things like incorporate user feedback and then recontact existing fans, users, viewers, or acquire new ones or retain old ones, if you're doing that when you have direct channel to reach them, like email, for example, that's one thing. There's no impediment there. But when you're using the other social platforms, then you are at the mercy of the algorithm. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit about the role of the paid promotion and paid placement and sponsored posts to actually reach those people.
Absolutely. To be clear, you pay for discoverability. Like, there is no free discoverability. Discoverability you pay for. Like, end of story. The way that, so when it comes to social media, like, you are unquestionably going to pay for that sort of baseline to show your material to anybody. I think what's important is using data to make very good guesses initially about who are the best people to show that data to. So certainly there's sort of initially there's quite a bit of educated guesswork. Like, we're for example, with Together Tales, we don't show it to a lot of people, those ads to a lot of people who aren't parents. and we don't show them to a lot of people who who specifically aren't parents in our target demographic. We certainly will do some like other larger outreach for experimentation purposes, but when it comes to audience building, there are some like very straightforward filters we can put in. Like, we're looking for people who have kids or who we know have kids in their lives. That's so we can do some like surface level targeting there that helps a great deal. But yeah, not to be very clear, like, I think it would be disingenuous to say that discoverability is it all something you can do without money behind it. Like, that's but how you do it and how intelligently you do it and how well it is targeted is really what we're talking about here, for sure. Yep.
I had a client that was using neurographics.
Oh yeah.
He would answer a survey. Based on your responses, he would slot you into left brain or right brain dominant, and into one of 6 categories there. And based on the answers, could determine which graphics would appeal to you.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it should be something you should use.
Yeah, that's super neat. Yeah, there's no lack of data. There are. We're all constantly generating data every second of every day, and there are super interesting platforms. Like neurofeedback is very, very interesting as well. There are as platforms evolve, we're getting different data all of the time. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's very interested in the moment in recent Google tracking innovations that will be coming out soon, that are going to help track conversions in brick and mortar stores, because right now if we show somebody an ad for whatever, a jacket, and they happen to order it online, like, that's a very easy conversion. It's like, then they purchased the thing. We know for sure that happened. But how can you track sales in brick and mortar? Well, we know that they went to the store that sells it, so we can make a pretty good guess. But how, there's soon going to be enough integration where we can tell, like, with pretty reliably whether that purchase was actually made or not for that specific jacket that person was bought, or was shown rather in an ad. So there's which is all to say that, like, the amount of data that is available is vast and fascinating and constantly being added to, and there are constantly different platforms, and we're very, very interested in all of them for sure. But the question is never where where is that data? It's what you do with it when you get it, and whether, how you look for outliers or not, or how you filter through it. I'm not sure that you asked a question. I think we both made like comments at each other kind of, but is that kind of what you're getting at?
Well, yeah, there's always room for improvement, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's always room for new platforms. There's always room for more data.
There's another company using EEG headsets that they have shoppers.
Is that the Muse headband?
Different one shoppers use, and they study brain activity as they're going through the aisles and looking at stuff.
Super interesting. Yeah, data. There's always more data, and we're always interested in more data for sure. Yep.
To what extent are you in your work? To what extent are you in your work looking at trying to define the audience for a product or a service versus trying to develop the product or service for an audience?
That's a great question.
In other words, I can think of a couple of examples. I have, for example, an animation library, and as I was watching your presentation, I'm thinking, this stuff is set, it's done. The content is not changing or evolving over time. But what you're doing, and many of the things you talked about, suggested to me that we could be using these techniques to determine the segment that was most responsive to that content, and then focusing more time and resources and exposure on a narrower and narrower segment with a higher and higher uptake rate. On the other hand, a lot of the things you talked about were about developing content in combination with the audience. And so in a sense, you're trying to build something that appeals to the audience in front of you rather than finding the right audience for the content. And I'm just wondering where, how do you, where your emphasis is in terms of what you're doing at Threads?
That's a great question. So for most of my professional career, as a community manager and social strategist, I'll answer this for me personally, the human, and then kind of like reach out to encompass Threads and Stitch. The vast majority of this is done after the thing exists. Right. For all of the other properties that I've worked on, the series is out, the book is launched or is about to be. The product is ready for delivery, and the client that I'm working with is looking for an audience development strategy that will serve that. And that's sort of classically the way that it's done. And Threads does a ton of that kind of work. That a thing exists, and we are right. But that doesn't mean that that sort of audience development can't be a part of that process anyway, even if the thing is quote unquote done. In the classical form. So the movie might be shot, for instance, but that doesn't mean that things can't be re-edited. We did. This was before my time, so I'm speaking to a project that was a little bit before I came on, but. Threads did a project with Second City for a bunch of comedy sketches, and put out a whole bunch of different clips, and the ones that were responded to the most strongly were like, this has, we were able to tell them this has to be in the final. Like, this joke gets everybody loves this joke, everybody responds to this joke. Make sure it is featured prominently, make sure this makes the final cut. This is it's used a lot in film, when you do test screenings. If you have an audience that doesn't respond the way that you intended to, probably a re-edit needs to happen. That there are for sure ways to, late in the process, bring that on. Not necessarily like tack it on at the end, because like really any agency can do that for you. What makes Threads unique is let us help you make that more of an ecosystem and a collaborative process, and help you help both of those things happening. So instead of us just finding your audience for you for a thing that is completely unchangeable, let's build an audience, and in the process build a thing for that audience, and make that a bit make that more of a process. Our dream at Threads is to do that from the beginning, to be involved with projects as early on as possible. And speaking personally, like as somebody in social strategy and community, that's when I don't want to come on to a game to start doing community management a week before launch day. I want to be embedded deep in the development process. So like every day I can document what the devs are doing, so that I can show people the drafts of the thing, so that by the time your game launches in 2 years, there's an audience that's very excited about it and ready for it, and also if there's an illustration that like a graphic designer comes up with and it gets posted and it becomes our most popular whatever, to be able to then go back to the creators and say like, this character design is something people love and you need to put it in. Like, unquestionably, this is something that people love and are going to be looking for in the final, and to have that kind of line of communication there, right? I'm not sure if this answers your question exactly, but at the end of the day, it's finding an audience for a thing that's complete is something that I think everybody's pretty comfortable with, but building something for an audience and having your audience help build the thing is what really gets us excited. And having that, the more collaborative that can be, and I would say the earlier in the process that can start, the more potential for some really interesting, like a very, very interesting collaboration can happen for sure. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes.
Now, okay. I'm just wondering if you've ever experienced any sort of resistance or any pushback from not necessarily just the audiences you've worked with, but in some of the big data collection that's happening outside of obviously the focus groups and things like that, but within cyberspace, within the Facebooks and Google and other social medias, where I'm just wondering if there has been, if you guys have seen any of that where it's like, oh wait, we've pushed it too much, or oh, we're actually seeing a resistance because there's more data that's being collected than people are comfortable with.
Okay, so just to be clear, so the potential audience offering resistance to the idea of this kind of communication, or the platforms themselves kind of resisting that data collection? No,
the audiences, okay. Not your audiences, but the users of the platforms showing any resistance to the data collection.
Oh, sure. Well, I don't think you have to look much further than like the last season of Black Mirror to know that people aren't super necessarily comfortable all of the time with how intensely linked in they are at all times, and like the data that's being collected about them at all times. At the end of the day, our data is like something that we are paying for convenience. Like if I want to be able to use, like, how Facebook operates, the term, the sort of like we kind of don't make any like, I suppose, take an ethical position about whether or not like Facebook's data collection is what it could or should be. That sort of is not the question that we're asking. The question that we're asking is that data exists, so what do we do with it? Does the fact that data being collected make some people uncomfortable? Absolutely. Like, does the fact my phone know where I am at all times, like, make me a little, like, squicky once in a while? Like, yeah, sure, absolutely. But at the same time, it's very convenient for me to be able to, like, turn to my digital assistant and, like, speak out loud and have something added to my grocery list. You know what I mean? And it's very convenient for me to stay connected to all of these. Everyone I've ever met in any context whatsoever has, like, easy access to me in a kind of gated and controlled way. So certainly, like, I think that people have varying degrees of comfort with the amount of their data that is accessible. We have not, at least certainly not in my time, like, I have not experienced anyone who is obviously uncomfortable because we reached out to them for a specific thing. It's like, hey, like, we can tell that you're a mom with an 11-year-old who lives in the Midwest, and you're, interested in science fiction and video games and role-playing games. We think that you would love this, and we show them an ad. There's never been a kind of direct, visible pushback that we've experienced from that kind of a specific thing.
Does that dialogue actually happen? Like, hey, I recognize you as being this demographic, having an 11-year-old son or daughter, living in this area, making whatever money, and I think that you'd be really interested in this. Is it okay if I show it to you?
Oh, absolutely not. It just appears. Yeah. No, it appears in their feed. So it appears in your Twitter feed, or it appears in your Facebook ads. And I mean, like, Facebook ads exist. You're going to be shown them anyway. Wouldn't you rather be shown things you might like? or might be interested in, or might actually improve your life, or might be a story you would enjoy. That the way that Facebook advertising should work, the reason that data exists and the reason it's potentially valuable is like Facebook wants to be delivering ads to their audience that their audience is going to enjoy. That's why they make it so much cheaper if your targeting is good, right? Like if that engagement is high, like the slide that I showed, that like certain segments of your audience will be so much cheaper to target to because it's working, because these are people who like are obviously enjoying the content, and Facebook wants to show, or any platform wants to show people content that they enjoy, that they want, that they're going to get something out of. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship if you can provide good content for somebody, for you and the platform that you're engaging with. Does that, I hope, answer it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just interested to see like how that sort of pushback manifests itself. It's just something.
Yeah, it's something that it's not really a direct dialogue between the person creating the ad and the person receiving the ad. That pushback tends to be against the platform that the ad is shown on. Yeah, definitely. Anyone else? Yes.
When you say like something from the inception, would you take let's say a series script or a feature film script from the inception, target who would maybe want to see it, and then from there, then there's still going to be a gestation period before it gets made, et cetera, et cetera. But would you come in at that point and say this would be your target market?
There's audience targeting and development that happens at every stage of the process. There's sort of there's the initial, okay, these are the fans of this kind of thing. We'll have them weigh in on this. That we think that this is the person that we're making it for. Then you can do that kind of testing with those potential audiences at various points throughout the creative, sort of any points you want throughout the creative process. But there's certainly the guesswork that happens at the beginning in terms of like, we're making a horror movie, so we're going to market to fans of horror movies, for instance. That then becomes like filtering down to, okay, where we know that this is going to be a horror movie with a woman who's a protagonist. So people who like Alien are probably going to be, you know what I mean? Like that kind of further fine tuning. As the thing develops, we get more data about who we should be marketing toward as well, right? So I totally hear what you're getting at. Like, is this a chicken or the egg sort of phenomenon? And like, it is more like Schrodinger's chicken egg, I guess. Like it's both yes, like both exist at the same time and both feed into each other. There are applications at every stage of the creative process, I think. And exactly what questions you ask that audience will obviously change. And the question that it defines which segment of the audience you reach out to will change. Which I think is why that, like, what your question is, like, the question, like, what is my question, like, what should I be asking, why that's so critical, right? Because that is what defines which audience you then reach out to.
Yeah, because you could be making something that there isn't a real audience for, or that you have targeted or you think is for these people, but it's not really for those people, it's for other people.
Oh, absolutely. We're surprised all of the time by who ends up responding positively, which is why that, like, those experiments where you show things to everyone, where you do the sort of like broader scatter shot, like again, we thought moms would be more interested in dads, but we actually found that, like, wow, dads in these few segments are like, these are the people we actually want to target, and the tail of retention is so much longer on those. So you can't. We don't think that you can ignore non-obvious market segments, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because you're absolutely right. The thing you end up building may be not at all for the person you thought it would be for. And part of, I think what we're trying to say as Threads is, like, be open to the possibility that you don't know who your audience is, and that is a process of discovery. And that is also something we can help you with is figure out like once you know what the core identity of the thing you want to make is, who that is actually for. And it might be someone you're not expecting, and it might surprise all of us in the process.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, great. Thank you so much.